Okay, so we're recording. All right, so today we have Professor Janos Fazekas. I really hope that I'm pronouncing that right, and I apologize if that's not. I'm sure I butchered it a little bit. Who's joining us from the Otros Lorand University's Faculty of Law in Budapest, where he is an associate professor in the Department of Administrative Law, and he teaches a course in administrative law there. He was supposed to be here in person. We were supposed to take him out to eat. Unfortunately, COVID has not allowed that to happen. Next time, next time we'll be happy to host you. Professor Fazekas' research topics are central government organization, regulatory authorities, and autonomous bodies in central government, the centralization of public administration, and the impact of a Hungarian regime change on Hungarian public administration. Today, he'll be presenting his research on the constitutional status of the government in Hungary, real socialist roots, and recent developments. Whenever you're ready.
Yep. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here online, not in person, unfortunately. I'm very happy to be here and give you a lecture about this topic. I'm trying to be not very long. I think that for a lecture of that sort, 30 minutes is more than enough in order to keep up attention. And after that, I'm very happy to answer any questions about this topic. And I think I try to share my my presentation. Yeah. Okay, can you see it? Okay. So, our topic today, the constitutional status of the government in Hungary, real socialist roots and recent developments. As Liz mentioned before, one of my research topics is the constitutional status of central government in Hungary and in Europe from sometimes a comparative point of view, and I think it's a very hot topic nowadays in Hungary and in Europe and in the whole world as well. Most experienced constitutional lawyers than me, I'm an administrative lawyer, as Liz mentioned, are very happy to be a Hungarian constitutional lawyer, because nowadays Hungary is in the center of constitutional law discussions and researches because of the so-called illiberal or authoritative developments in Hungary and all over the world. And I think that my presentation and my research maybe do some kind of contribution to that discussion. As a starting point, I think that it would be useful to give a short outlook to the communist or Marxist way of thinking on state organization and constitution and the functioning or performance of the state. I think that if we start with a starting point like that, I think it can be very useful in order to understand recent developments, not only maybe in Hungary, but in the Central and Eastern European region as well. The base of this way of thinking is the unity of state. Following the way of thinking of communist politicians and legal scholars and political scientists, the best way of operating a state, in a communist country, is the unification or the unity of the state. There is no need for checks and balances, no need for separation of powers. The highest public body in the state organization is parliament. It is the body which represents the people as a whole, and doing so, every state body is subordinated to it, including the government or the cabinet. If you are thinking about building up some kind of system of checks and balances or separation of powers, this is against the will of the people, because the will of the people is represented through the members of the parliament. So every state power or authority should be exercised through the parliament. So the state administration is not only subordinate to the parliament, but is a highly hierarchical system. And this state administration, not public administration, it is an important difference, but state administration, it is under the cabinet, the panel of ministers and the prime minister, and the cabinet is subordinate to the parliament. The story until this point is from a legal point of view. If we read a communist style constitution, for example, the Hungarian constitution from 1949, we can think that this is a normal constitution. It could have been written in any Western European or American country, with a very good listing of human rights: right to freedom, right to life and human dignity, freedom of expression, and so on and so on. And for the first time, we can think that it contains some elements of separation of powers and checks and balances. The point is that there is one very important and very severe restraint or limit of the parliament's authority. It is the power of the Communist Party. So the first level of the story, the original text of the constitution, it is not the point, because it's only the ideology of the operation of the state in a communist country. Although it is written that the highest public body is parliament, and the highest organization of state administration is cabinet, practically these statements are not true, because these public bodies are practically subordinate to the Communist Party. All members of the parliament are members or so-called friends of the Communist Party. All members and high officials of the cabinet are members of the Communist Party. So, however, the original text of the constitution sometimes not differ very much from a democratic constitution. The content of it, the personal content of it, through the members of the and officials of the Communist Party, result in not a democratic way of government, but an authoritative way of government. Let's have a look at the Communist Constitution in Hungary from 1949. It is a historical fact that the codification, issuing of this constitution, went after the example of the Soviet Constitution from 1936.
Sorry, your slides are not advancing.
Yeah.
Are you clicking through your slideshow?
Oh.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay, that's okay. Can you see this slide, the Communist Constitution, 1949?
No, it's just stuck on the first. The Constitution, yeah, on the first slide.
It's very weird.
There you go. Things are changing now. I think maybe you have to hit the present slide.
Okay. Okay. So let's do it.
Okay.
For now. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
So the Communist Constitution. It went after the example of the Soviet Constitution from 1936. What's more, some parts of this Hungarian Constitution is a simple translation of the Soviet Constitution. So the codificators maybe thought that they couldn't do any failure in representing and transforming the Soviet example. Following and reading the rules of this constitution, we can see that the parliament's regulatory power is not limited. For example, when it defines governmental organization. It is not for the cabinet, not for the government to regulate its own organization and performance. Of course, the cabinet was able to issue decrees and resolutions and decisions, but there were no limits to the parliament's regulatory power. For example, all ministries and main agencies of the government were established by an act of the parliament, and all ministries were enumerated by an act of parliament because the codificators wanted to follow the idea of the unity of the state and the primacy of the parliament, the National Assembly. The only assignment, the only task of the cabinet and the state administrative system is to implement parliament's decisions. Although in parliamentary systems, the cabinet is the highest body of the public administration and the governmental system, and the cabinet and the prime minister defines the main outline, the main direction of the governmental agenda and policy and programs. The Hungarian cabinet in the 90s and the 50s, during the communist era, had no such competencies. It was only an administrative agency whose main task was to implement the communist parties, not the parliament, but the communist parties' agenda and program. Doing so, there were no need for a prime minister who is a real political leader of the government. In the communist era, the prime minister was some kind of civil servant, the first civil servant of the government, whose only task was to serve the will of the state party, the only party. There were no other parties in the political system, only the Communist Party. So the prime minister was only the chair of the cabinet, the chair of this panel. And to tell the truth, the prime minister had no an individual political persona of their own. It is a very important difference between communist and democratic governmental systems. The next step of the story, I hope that this slide can be seen, the fourth one. Yes, okay. The next step in the historical line is the regime changed and the revision of the constitution in 1989. I'm not sure how are you interested in European politics and global politics of the 80s and the 90s, but at the end of the 80s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, who were not formally part of the Soviet Union, but were subordinate of not only allies, but subordinate to the Soviet Union, became free and started to set up some kind of democratic form of government. In Hungary, it resulted in setting up a parliamentary political and governmental system. Due to the nature of this political situation, there were no revolution. There were no and sharp shift from the communist system. Political compromises had to be made in order to make an agreement with the Communist Party and communist politicians, and with with the Soviet Union as well, not only between Hungary and other actors, but the United States and Western European countries played a very important role in these compromises. So within Hungary, the democratic parties and the Communist Party had to make an agreement in order to set up a political situation where a free general election is possible, and after that a democratic form of government can be built. So after the political compromise in 1989, the system of checks and balances started to be built. Let's have a look at the executive. There were some major shifts, major changes after the era of the communist constitutional system. First of all, the cabinets, the highest panel of the government. I'm back. I think I'm back. Zoom is not so keen on Hungarian public law and politics. That's how it goes. Let's have a try with the presentation. Can you see it? Okay. Okay. Where was I? Yes, cabinet's organizational power. So after the political compromise and revision of the constitution, it was not a new one. It was not a new constitution. It was only several amendments was made on the communist constitution. The cabinet was given with the competences and powers in order to maintain a state administration system which is fit to implementing the agenda of the cabinet. What's more, independent local self-governments were established. Before the regime change, there were local councils, local authorities in Hungary, but they were not independent from the government. They were subordinate to the government, not only to the Communist Party, but to the cabinet, the government as well. And it was a very major and important step in the process of democratization to set up independent local self-governments in towns and other elements and levels of the state territorial system. Another very important step was within the executive, setting up autonomous or independent central bodies, for example, the State Audit Office and the Media Authority and other authorities, which were responsible for safeguarding human rights and civil liberties. And in order to do that, it was a must to make them independent from the government, especially due to the requirements of the European Union. And out of the executive, judicial review was established after or during the regime change. Before the regime change, judicial review of governmental and public administration decisions was possible, but with very tight limits. There were a list of decisions and operations in a statutory act, which could be reviewed by administrative courts and the judiciary. And after the regime change, the scope of judicial review was highly broadened. So after the amendments of the constitution, the revision of the constitution, Parliament was not anymore the only carrier of popular sovereignty. Other actors of the governmental system, including the executive, the government, became capable of carry out the will of the people in the democratic governmental system. Okay. Although it was a regime change in 1989, and democratic general elections happened in 1990. We can face the very interesting phenomenon that some elements of the above mentioned real socialist way of thinking of government and political system survived. So although the revision of the constitution was full, and practically it was a new constitution after the regime change, we can see that some elements of the Marxist or communist or real socialist way of thinking regarding government survived. First of all, the non-existence of a new constitutions. I think it's some kind of important element of that. So the politicians during the regime change wanted to set up a new constitution, but the political compromise wasn't able to reach that level. So the political parties didn't think that this revision in 1989 is forever. They wanted to codify a new constitution, but they think that until it is possible, these amendments of the former constitution will suffice. So it was not a permanent constitution. It was only for some kind of short period. This short period lasted more than 20 years. We can say that the cabinet's constitutional status was not very different, apart from the fact that its organizational power was stated in the revised constitution. Parliament and the acts and decisions of Parliament played an important role in organizing and maintaining and operating the governmental system. Main decisions have to be made by the Parliament. The ministries had to be enumerated by Parliament. Main governmental and public administration agencies had to be set up by Parliament and not by the decision or decree of the government or the cabinet. So the cabinet's organizational power remained between very, very tight limits during the 90s and at the first decade of the 2000 years. And the prime minister, the public legal status of the prime minister remained not so very strong. For example, the regulatory powers were very tight of the prime minister. It is very important and very controversial because when the founding fathers and mothers of the regime change system started to set up the new governmental system, the main example for them was Germany and the chancellor system of Germany, which operates with a very, very powerful head of government, the chancellor, which goes for prime minister in Hungarian in the Hungarian way of thinking. But the founding fathers and mothers weren't able to set up a coherent and a comprehensive approach of the chancellor system. Some elements got into the constitution and under levels of the statutory regulation, but it was not a comprehensive approach at all. The next step in the historical outline is the new fundamental law in 2011 in Hungary. After the election result in 2010, when the present Prime Minister, Mr. Viktor Orban, and his right-wing party won the election, the new government decided to make very important and very deep decisions about a new constitution. They decided to repeal the former constitution and codify a new one. They were capable of doing that because the new government had a 2/3 majority in the parliament, and with the 2/3 majority, you can do anything within the Hungarian constitutional and governmental system. So there are no further limits. For example, regarding deciding on a new constitution or issuing cardinal acts or something like that. So a new fundamental law was approved, and in that new fundamental law, Parliament has no unlimited authority to define governmental organization. In the former constitution, it was a very important regulation that Parliament's power to maintain, to operate, to set up the governmental system has no restraints, no limitations. There are no such regulation in the new fundamental law. There is some kind of definition of cabinet. In the former constitution, there were no definition for the cabinet on the highest level of the governmental system or the executive. In the former constitution, there was very short regulations that the members of the cabinet are the prime minister and the ministers, and there were a not so comprehensive list of the tasks of the cabinet. In the new fundamental law, there is a definition that, for example, the cabinet is the general organ, the general body of the executive, and can carry out any competence which is not transferred to other governmental organizations or agencies. There is one element which is not discussed very thoroughly, I think, in Hungary and in the international public law discussions. But I think it's a very crucial point of the new constitutional regulation, that in the new fundamental law there is no formal government program or agenda or any general policy which is to be approved by the parliament. In the former constitution, it was a must for the newly elected government to present a program to the parliament, and when the parliament elected the prime minister, at this decision, the parliament had to decide, had to approve the government's program for the next 4 years for the governmental era, and I think that it was some kind of basis for holding the government to account, because if there is an official document for the governmental program, it is some kind of starting point for the opposition, for example, or for the media, or for the citizens, for holding the government to account and for probing, to questioning, to scrutinizing the prime minister themselves, the ministers, and the whole governmental system, questioning them that you wrote in the program that you will do this or that with the tax system, the pension system, the foreign policy, and so on and so on. And for now, there is no such program, no such document. And I think that it is some kind of symbolic question, some kind of symbolic matter for maintaining a healthy system of checks and balances. I think that it was a symbolic step with other steps as well, and it was a starting point. The approval of the new fundamental law, it was a starting point for the centralization of the governmental system in Hungary, not only within the executive, but outside of the executive. Within the executive, there were some there have been some phenomena which can be experienced by now, and which has been experienced recent years after 2011. Some examples, only some examples. The cabinet in a parliamentary system and in Hungary is usually not for making individual decisions, but for doing or making normative decisions, issuing decrees and other general normative decisions. But in the recent years, several amendments have been made to the government regulation in order to transfer competence to the government, to the cabinet, in order to deciding individual cases. Just one example. Recent years, an amendment, a law has been approved about personal matters. For example, in Hungary nowadays, if a civil servant or even a university professor in a state-owned university reaches the retirement age in order to go to pension, so to retire, this civil servant or professor or teacher or physician has to be dismissed from their position. There is an exception. If their employer thinks that their work is essential for the operation operation of the public body or for the university or hospital, the employer can apply to the government in order to gain a permit to employ this employee further, although he or she reached the retirement age. And it must be the decision of the cabinet itself. So this competence is not transferred to any subordinate agency in the field of education or healthcare or something like that. This decision must be made precisely by the cabinet. In other matters, the competencies and the power of the prime minister have been strengthening in a very severe and very serious way. The prime minister carries out or makes several decisions on personal matters. The prime minister can make decisions on behalf of the government in a broader sense. For example, there is a prime minister's office, and the minister who is the head of this prime minister's office can make very important decisions. For example, every permanent secretary, every secretary of state, every department head in the ministries and in most central agencies can be appointed only after the approval of the prime minister's office minister. And I think it's somehow it is a strengthening of the powers of the prime minister. In the recent years, a very serious concentration has happened in the field of central and territorial agencies. On the other hand, several amendments and the fundamental law itself has weakened the constitutional and legal status of local governments. Only one example: before 2010, local governments were responsible for operating and maintaining healthcare, social care, and education institutions. So schools, primary and secondary schools, hospitals, and social care homes. In the 2010s years, these assignments have been transferred to central and deconcentrated agencies, which are subordinate to the government. And doing so, the government transferred not only the tasks from the local self-governments, but the budgetary sources as well. outside the executive, a very serious weakening of checks and balances has been experienced, could be experienced. For example, the competences of the judiciary when reviewing the decisions and operation of the executive have been weakened. For example, when the administrative courts review the decisions of immigration offices, they cannot reform, they cannot modify the decisions of the immigration offices anymore. They can only repeal the decisions and give the decisions or the cases back to the agency, but the judiciary cannot reform or cannot modify the decisions. Constitutional lawyers in Hungary can tell very interesting stories about the limiting of the competences of the constitutional court regarding reviewing laws and other acts regarding constitutional matters. So, to put it in a nutshell, a very serious process of centralization has happened in Hungary recently, with very interesting justification. When the government transferred healthcare, social care, and education tasks from the local self-governments to the governmental agencies, the most important justification or reasoning for that was efficiency. In budgetary matters, for example, and accountability. The government stated that local self-governments are not capable of maintaining these public services efficiently and in a transparent way, and they have no enough budgetary sources, and it is much less complicated to carry out, to administer these public services within the state organization subordinate to the government. The government always referred to the will of the people. The main justification was that this government is elected by a two-thirds majority. This is the will of the Hungarian people. So everybody who is against it is against the will of the Hungarian people. And what's more, I think maybe it's a bit similar to experiences abroad, even in the United States. A very important justification of centralization was some kind of line of external threats of immigration, threats from the international network of George Soros. Which is some kind of the main evil in the eyes of the Hungarian government. So within these external threats, there must be unity within Hungary, within the Hungarian government and the public sector, and there is no need, there is no room for criticism, there is no rule for debate, for public debate. To draw some conclusions at the end of my lecture, there are I think some very intriguing questions which occur regarding the centralization of Hungarian government and the historical prefaces of it. First of all, the primacy of parliament. Is it a real socialist remnant or is it a modern idea? Because we can face a very intriguing phenomenon that the Hungarian government, which is a right-wing government and officially against the communist system before the regime change, uses justifications and uses ideological matters or ideological items which are very similar to the justification and the ideology of the communist or the real socialist system. There are some similarities with former historical periods, not only the real socialist era, but the inter-war era between the First and the Second World War in Hungary, which was also an authoritative kind of political system, and I think that that it is very intriguing as well. For example, in this interwar era, there were also external threats regarding Hungary because of the political climate of Central Europe. So I think that when we are talking about these intriguing historical and ideological and jurisdictional, jurisprudential differences and characteristics, I think that as every public lawyer, we should draw attention to 5 questions, which was asked by Tony Benn. I'm not sure you are aware of the life and work of Tony Benn, who was a British politician, died some years ago. He was a very charismatic parliamentarian, a great debater, and a great speaker in Parliament in the United Kingdom, and he had 5 questions for everybody, those in power. First question: what power have you got? Second: where do you get it from? And the third: in whose interests do you exercise it? The fourth one: to whom are you accountable? And the fifth one: how can we get rid of you? I think when we are talking about governmental systems, checks and balances, separation of powers, and the operation of government, I think that every public lawyer, even constitutional lawyers, administrative lawyers, and other kind of lawyers who are researching such matters, such questions, they are all looking for answers to these questions. And I hope that maybe my lecture and my researches can make some kind of little contribution to that. Thank you for your attention, and if you've got any questions regarding these matters, I'm very happy to answer them.